Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's episode. Liftoffs into unknown skies. One can say, just like a spaceship lifts off into space, inanimate matter has lifted off into the position of the mind. And the mind is by nature a multidimensional phenomena, but its origin will be singular. You see, reality is divided in two ways. Either the cause was singular, the effect is multidimensional, or the cause was multidimensional, the effect is singular. When we take the scientific approach, we are actually looking at a stable effect and wondering about all the different things that led to it. So, in some sense, the cause of the universe is multidimensional through a scientific lens. It has to be if there's a requirement for there to be exploration. Other viewpoints, such as the Abrahamic context, the religious context, we find the opposite. It's as if the cause was singular and the effect is multidimensional. And so, where you pinpoint, where you designate the intelligence of the moment, if it's in your cause, there is no fear. If it's in your effect, you have to conquer fear. Today, I haven't uploaded it yet. I have a lot of talks that I've kind of recorded but haven't uploaded. And today I recorded a talk when I was in downtown Toronto on my phone. It was called "The Strength of the Giving Hand." And in this talk, I was looking at people, and I was looking like I was literally by the street, like downtown Toronto, and I was on the side, like I was looking, while I was on break, like I was looking at the street. And you know what I notice? I notice we human beings rarely see one another. We tend to see ourselves first. I'm not talking about a sort of simple selfishness. Color, and it doesn't change color to just match the environment underneath it. It changes color as if color is the language of its mind. And we have people like Terence McKenna saying something very fascinating. He said the octopus is a naked mind. What that means is the language, the color that changes on the surface of the octopus is its communication, is its language. And so similarly, the octopus is wearing its language. Literally, its existence is its external color is a reflection of its inner state. Now the thing is, we are similar to how we are wearing clothing, we are also wearing ideology. And sometimes this ideology is so centered in our own truths that lifetimes will go by and we will not notice that there was a world here beyond our eyes. You see, the world beyond your eyes is not another dimension. It is the world right here in front of you. But when I say it's beyond your eyes, it is beyond the first set of eyes that have concluded it. Human beings, because they're in unknown and known environments, That means you will go through states of certainty and uncertainty. And the way nature works is that because we sleep and we wake up and it feels like a new day, in some sense the memory is becoming loose. As if you can say, as you live the day from the moment you wake up, your attention is, it's like your hand gripping onto the manifest world, and before you sleep, it's gripping onto it harder, harder, and harder. Some people eventually realize that all phenomenology in the moment has to do also with their presence of mind, so they study their mind before assuming they're a content of their mind. You see, someone once said the content of your mind is not your choice. And if that's the case, that means you have free will what to do with the data, but you don't have free will over what kind of data comes to you. We are all born in parts of the world, and eventually a program of identification will find us. You will find the point of knowledge is the expansion of self into various parallel versions of itself. Knowledge is multidimensional because you start off from one dimension, and as experience continues, that same dimension increases in depth. So it's kind of like, imagine if there was a journey from the number 0 to the number 1 to the number 2, but in each journey the self did not forget the where it started from. So it's as if scientists are kind of saying it's like it was nothing and then something came. It's kind of like them saying there was a zero value and then there came something of value. Now, when we look at that something of value, it has come from two positions, not one. And this is the issue with the educational system, is that it is teaching people that they are only in one dimension. You're actually in two. That means there is the physical birth. You were physically born. And then I don't know what psychologists say, but I think it's around the age 14. Or it's like at some point you become a self. You become established self by 14. You can say the child, the moment it becomes a creature of a name, of a creature that has a name. The subjective birth occurs. Children are not born as thoughts. They are conditioned into being identified as creatures of thought. This is why children are not born knowing the language, but in behavioral patterns that repeat, they eventually get acquainted to the language. That means the child wants water, it doesn't know what the name is, it hears the word, now it knows. Now it can say, now it has a sort of symbolic value. I find that human beings are pretty much receiving and expressing. That's pretty much the game. You as a human being, you're either receiving or expressing. You know, you either in this world need to give love to people, or you need to learn to receive it. You know, human beings fall, I find, in one of these sides. Now, at some point, when there comes a calling for the wonder of something more, literally your questions are intensifying in depth, that means they're relating to more of the reality's dimensions. Kinda the process of articulation has to do with where you're placing the camera. Anytime, like right now as I'm speaking to you, anytime before I speak, it's like before there is that movie prior to me to translate, before I share my inner reality, I am aware that I can view subjective phenomena from different angles. So innately, I don't feel as a thought. Because when you feel like you're a thought, you feel you can't change in a world that's always changing. And that becomes an illusion. Any person who thinks they're lucky or unlucky, it's weird, because let me tell you why. Because you're again going into the belief game. You're putting a hat on and you think that hat should always be on your head. To be honest, a lot of our beliefs have to do with how we feel the world is moving and the consequence of action in the environment. That means if you see that if you do something that it leads to a kind of destructive outcome, you will realize anytime you play with destruction, you'll probably get destroyed at the end too. You know, you cannot have your mind do something and not remember it. You know, it will try to constantly re-input its past into the future. You see, we feel that right now, like you can remember your past, but let me tell you, you can never remember the past. That means there came a time where I kind of realized time travel is impossible. Even if the technologically we could reach it, it would still be impossible because the self changes momentarily. That means you can celebrate your birthday, but you can realize every day is a day of change. You know what I mean? Data, any sort of data. Literally, just like how the person has to, like you see food, you gotta use, like, you know, the knife and the fork to kind of make it into smaller pieces and consume the food. Similarly, man has to, when he sees a sort of phenomena that the living being is examining, the living intelligence has to begin just like this knife and fork, kind of using language and articulation to cut up the phenomena into familiarity. So it's as if you look at something, it's not familiar to you, you break that thing into a bunch of other pieces, like you separate it, and it is a kind of reversion to the objective. Literally, the subject has to have an objective validity, or the subject is invalid. You know, that is the world we think we live in. You know, on some level, the secular society denies imagination, and it has good reason, as if like we don't need people's imagination, kind of, you know. Excuse me, guys. On one angle, you shouldn't think imagination is real. On another angle, your atoms, electrons hallucinating into minds, you know. When I say a hallucination, that's pretty much an empty value, you know. So if I believe matter is the purpose of life, just to be material, you look at the purpose of matter and it's just stardust moving in empty space. What are you going to do? You know? It's as if like you are renting the stardust, your cellular, your atomic existence for a while. It's as if the intelligence of the cosmos has come into this form. We get so engulfed in our inner subjective realities at times, I find many people, there's enough people around the world to kind of reflect this. What can be said? If I believe that we are purely material creatures, language's purpose will be rendered void. Literally, it's a nullification of subjective value, and what that means is history is an illusion, if we are truly materialists. But if we do dare to look at the light of consciousness as a sort of subtler room that we're in, as if you're not just in one room, you're in many rooms at once. That means anytime I have a memory of the past, there's still a part of my attention that was kept alive in that moment, from that moment. In the subtitle, I've written about this concept recently that I've kind of found a nice way to talk about it. I call it the Tetris of morality. Yeah. The reason is because I find that the behavior of each person born in history has to acknowledge to some degree the behavior of those people in the past. So literally everybody in history who's lived and their influence on the world has literally, like all the Tetris pieces that have already come in that game, some Tetris pieces are out, and so there's a certain spatial design. That means it's like there's a unique way that ideas can happen on this planet. For now, most human beings feel money is the greatest resource, and that is why art is dying. That means the only way to get art seen nowadays is it's kind of like you want to see, you have to put it on the money. You got to put it on the dollar bill. When I looked at what nationalism is, I realized it's pretty much art worship. We are worshipping artwork. We are worshipping the ownership of atoms in space as a thought. Now, when I started off on this path of kind of wondering about the depths of the mind, I noticed, I saw some questions that I felt at first I was the only one who was seeing them. Then through certain figures in history, I realized other people had seen it too. And I kind of realized that every wave and generation of human beings that are born, the children are the world, because it is the world that they see, that they extract their definitions from. Pretty much you'll realize kind of like the fruition of altruism being that in the compassionate act towards the world, you are being actually a compassionate moment of mind. This is why when you do something good, the echo of that action's significance, that action's significance echoes internally, and it's kind of like you not realizing on some level it's your physical body just kind of dictating meaning, the movement of your physical body, and there's also the movement of your attention, but you're going to see the relationship that the moment has to the moment is different than the relationship man has to the moment. And Mr.Within is simply saying that the relationship that the whole moment has with the whole moment is non-conceptual. Literally, we need to lift off into that unknown sky. And so that's what I'm realizing. There's nothing to teach. All teachers should just say the topics. And, it's kind of one of those things where we need explorers now. We don't need teachers and students. We need advanced communicators and pilots of consciousness. We need human beings that are realizing the value of their mind is not to do what a robot can do. You see? We right now think, oh no, automation's going to come. So many people are going to lose their jobs. Oh no, what kind of world are we going to live in the future, like past the year 2050, when things have become so automated? let me tell you what kind of world we're going to live in. We're going to live in a world where for the first time, mental attention to mental activity has more value than attention to objective phenomena. My mind has seen fires. What I mean, like an actual campfire. One blessing I had in this life was that I wasn't too disconnected from nature. That my greatest teachings aren't from human beings. The greatest things I've learned aren't people saying them. They are experiential movements. And for a long time, I was like, you kind of hear people like Jordan Peterson, people like many people way before Jordan Peterson who are constantly saying, like, speak your truth, be truthful in this world that you're in once. Now, the issue is when you want to speak your truth, you end up being in your world first. So believe it or not, all wars have occurred because those two people who were communicating, who had power, couldn't understand each other. You're gonna laugh how much inefficiency to our civilization has come because those two beings who were communicating to one another, those two influential beings, didn't realize they can always create a new dimension. Like, I'll tell you guys something personally, okay? Through different fields of my work, and when I say work, I mean my I don't mean it in regards to my artistic work. I mean it in regards to work. I have required to people who I've had disharmonies with to visit them again. So imagine you having a fight with someone, an argument, and then leaving, and then having to come back and communicate to them. Right? So what would happen is that I have even, I don't know if many people understand this, there's this quote that says, the way to get rid of your enemy is to make your enemy into your friend. Right? And I always thought about that quote. I'm like, how's that possible? There's been a disagreement. How could we ever be friends? And then I realized, oh my God, there can always be a new moment of defining things. That means Ludwig Wittgenstein, this German philosopher, said the limits of my language is the limits of my world. So you're going to see that language is limiting the world. So if you want that world to change, you have to literally create a new moment of language, a new attention in this kind of spatial and timal dimension, reality. So what I'm saying is, you should eventually, I feel this is the intellectual position, not intellectual, I feel this is just what the end, like this is where we're going to, communication has phases, okay? Right now our civilization doesn't even care that much about its mind. It cares about its mind only if it helps its physicality be in a certain way. So you're using your mind for the sake of your body. You're not using your mind for the sake of your mind. And this is why the intelligence of literally so many people alive right now is on lockdown. It's on lockdown not because there's some weird force of karma. Not because everything's like this world is like a program, God is like a programmer, and it's like, all right, this is gonna happen to it, and da 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 da. You see, we are transcending the need for archetypes, and this is what Carl Jung. I'm sure he saw that far, but he couldn't say because he knew he was alive to set up shop of a certain ideology. That means I primarily, a lot of my ideologies don't come down to actually kind of a sort of stoic approach where I'm saying it's about asking the question, therefore wondering about the virtue of the self. So I've realized that there something needs to happen to the inner value before the external value, even if it changes, can be satisfying. It's kind of like it doesn't matter what kind of amazing hot food they put in front of you. If you don't have like a fork and a spoon or something, like if you don't have food, if you don't have the proper tools, you cannot engage it. So what I'm noticing is that there's no such thing as intelligence. It's just about how much you've opened your eyes in that moment and how much you see, right? It's kind of like swordsmanship, the art of swordsmanship that warriors held. This art form was an art form where you don't have your sword in your hand 24/7, you know. In some sense, similarly, the mind's intelligence abides by the true nature simply to reserve energy. It's the best way. That means some people think they need to have more thoughts to be successful, but certain ancient traditions were like, you're not a thought. So it's like it doesn't matter about the ratio of good or bad thoughts, positive, negative. I mean, of course, where your attention is directed is important, but you have to realize you're painting the picture that you're getting so fascinated about, right? And that comes into the challenges of studying the subjective realm, right? We can say language is the child of the objective self and the subjective self, the objective realm and the subjective realm, because there's a way of acknowledging yourself where as if one part of the moment is separate from what the whole moment, and there's another way of seeing it, you're the whole moment and that part is within you. So there's one way of seeing that you are dying in this world, or the world is dying into you. That means it's as if it's like it's because your eyes are changing, the world is changing. That's when a person reaches that level, they become humbled. You know why? Because power is the child is kind of like the it's child's play for an eternal being. It's not about self. You're not here to prove. It's like most people, I'm telling you, they miss out on life because they're trying to prove to their past who they will be in the future, and the future never comes until suddenly, the candle wax reaches the end. And the light of consciousness, in some sense, leaves to be found in a new way. You know how I see the human being? I see it through an event. And I see it only through a very simple emotional behavioral way. And what I mean by that is there's a vision. That means it's as if there is something. I thought my mind was empty when I was younger. Then I realized the whole cosmos is being it. It's like that was a surprise. The whole world is in your mind, or your mind is being the world. Very simple. On some level, your intelligence is not just being the individual idea of you, it is also simultaneously being the collective. It's kind of like the opposite of yourself that you're hiding from. You see, when I wondered, kind of like in religious context, they were kind of like the divine will tests the free will. So of course we got to understand, it's as if we say the cause is intelligent, the effect is under the rule of that intelligence. So literally, when the cause, like think of it this way: an atheist would say, from nothing something has come. A theist would say, from something nothing has come. That means God created everything, even nothing. You know, nothing is part of it, comes with the package of everything. So in one manner, the world is being given permission for the personality to justify it. In another, it's the permission of the justification of reality relies on the usage of the technology of the language. And I'm telling you, this is something so fascinating. I don't understand why they don't teach it, because I think nobody has dared to tackle it. The only reason I feel I'm so boldly speaking about his ideas is because I feel I've just opened my eyes in this world. You know, I feel in regards to how long the universe has existed, you know, 1 millisecond of a comment shouldn't hurt it that bad. Science fiction story. But the science fiction story is set in the year 2289, I think. And the script was called Project 12. And in it was the idea I had that human beings had reached a point. I'm kind of explaining from now till that 200 sci-fi, like 200 years. You know, like I'm kind of giving my own take on this, right? And what I see is that literally the guy changed his right hand for a robotic hand, and suddenly changed his other hand, changed all his body parts, and eventually the value that technology gave consciousness started to devour the natural world. That means it's like, it's kind of seeing like, inefficiency leads to unnecessary cruelty always. We can't seek a perfection that is too order driven, or we will literally become robots. And so in this sci-fi story, I'm saying the human being started replacing everything until he's like, why am I just being human? I'll just update everything into something more advanced. And so my story begins, and the whole script begins from the moment where one robot, who's kind of like literally in 2289, human beings are acting, are all robots that are acting human. That means the only thing that has stood the test of time was the behavior and the personality and the language of the human being. The biology of it was long forgotten, and it's as if like nature had taken its last steps in the desert of the technological era. And so it's very funny because the script begins with this robot called Project 1 and this other robot named Project 2. And Project 1 is the female, and Project 2 is the male. And I think it was like that. And Project 2 goes and asks Project 1 and says, requesting access to program marriage. This robot wants to marry like a human, like this other robot, but that's how the dialogue, I wrote it. And so the female robot says, access denied. And then the robot says, requesting access to human life simulation something. So then the whole story begins is these two robots are taking this kind of human test, this program test, where literally they're simulating human life. So they're trying to wonder if they were human, would they be compatible or not? So they're entering a simulation of kind of robots entering a simulation of human life. Anyways, eventually they find each other in the simulation, and they become Project 12. They get married. That's the whole script. But that's the whole script. But what it is I'm suggesting a point in human civilization. You know, it's Shakespeare has this quote where he says, "Some people are born great. Some people achieve greatness. And some people have greatness thrust upon them." That means the value of your life sometimes has to do in regards to where you are. It has to do with what you do, and it has to do with how the world wants you. You see, it's not just some people who fall in love with the world. It's very playful. It's as if like a mind can fall in love with another mind, but your soul can't fall in love with another soul. The soul is the whole moment. Do you know? So it just becomes a state where it's self-allowance at its purest form. That's love. It's literally you don't need to do anything for it to be what it is, right? It's kind of like why human beings were smart enough as creatures to create the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That means it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter how you look like. There's a mind behind your eyes, and that has value, and we see it as a civilization. That is where we need to get to. And so we need to have liftoffs into unknown skies, which is another way of saying, ladies and gentlemen, there should be rebellions occurring on school campuses all the time, but not external rebellions, internal rebellions. That means that students should question the curriculum to a point where they see the value of the curriculum. And in life, sometimes you're prepared, sometimes you're not, you know? Sometimes you have to let go of a truth that has defined you for so long. And you're not letting it go because it's the better way, or it's the right way, or it's the righteous thing to do, or it's the smart thing to do. Forget the reward mentality. That should stop after in childhood, wanting something from life. It's like it's as if, because it's kind of like how, when have you noticed in certain human psychology, when somebody gets hurt, it now in their mind it's there's a justification to see others get hurt. They're like, I got hurt, so it's okay for others to get hurt. You know, so that sort of mentality is it's better than nothing, but it's worse than the better. You know, so what I mean by that is that you have to pilot free will, and you will pilot it in moments, so in known moments and in unknown moments. And the issue with experimentation is that as many times the experiment is run, it will lead to different results. It will lead to different results, not because of the observer effect, not because the person is looking at the experiment and their attention changes the experiment somehow, because the person is a different person tomorrow. That's why the value of the experiment changes. This is why you can't, even if you ask for evidence in a changing world, the evidence is going to change. So language, we have to be playful with it. And if we as the modern generations don't use the tools accessible in modern times, it's as if we are automatically like, our ancestors are like, damn, why aren't you guys doing something new? Every time there is a sort of, it's kind of strange. It's as if, how the lion has to kill the prey, and then it feels it can eat the prey, but the hyena eats whatever like it finds. You can say the hyena is like the beggar of the forest, and the peasant of the forest, and the king lion is the king of the forest. And you see, in the lion psychology, it doesn't eat what it hasn't killed, so it doesn't believe anything that its certainty hasn't confirmed, in some sense. So the same way is sometimes people, they don't learn by you imposing laws on them, you know they don't learn by having laws imposed on them. They learn by they themselves bringing the law. That means this is something that's so crucial to the study and to the efficiency of law, of any law system, that the person will abide to the law if they feel it is their free will that has brought it forth. It's like there's a chessboard. You won't be responsible for something if that thing is not real for you, and the only way that thing becomes real if you experientially engage. In the same way, the business entrepreneur went to the market with a certain business model, with a certain way it set up shop, and in that moment, suddenly when it saw the environment and the shift of value in the economy, and of course, guys, I am the way I sometimes, just to be able to speak about something at an efficient time, I how would I say it? A metaphor does the job of two paragraphs in one, something like that. The business entrepreneur realigns the business model in accordance to the new wave of data that arrives from the environment as a new action is taken. So in this life, you don't need to just worry about making decisions. You have to make decisions, see the result, and wonder how the result is going to influence your next decision. I find that true knowledge has to do with existential style. Literally, you are a creature, you have a unique DNA, you're a member of the human species, and as you open your eyes, and as you have kind of been, think of it this way, till this moment right now that you're listening to my talk, life has sculpted you. Life has shaped you based in accordance to certain experiences. It's kind of funny. It's like before, like when the child is born, we look at that newborn child and we're like, did this child cause itself to exist? We see no. That means something outside of the self creates the self. The point of evolution is the same psychological urge to constantly experience a new self. We're not just doing it we're not just reproducing for objective reasons. There's also a subjective reason. And most people think the subjective reason is continuity, but I find the subjective reason is it's not continuity. You see, it's like after some point, you look at every avenue of you approach the phenomena in many known ways, And at some point, you just stop. And you kind of realize the value in Lao Tzu's words when he said action through inaction in the Tao Te Ching. That means pretty much this is another way of saying that you will feel the presence, the living presence, living, it's not inanimate, it's living, the living presence of all manifestation if you stop. If you realize there is the value of action through inaction, not all the time, but in certain moments. That means it's as if in a moment of rage, it's like you gotta be quicker than the guardians of the moment and hold back your hand. When I say hold back your hand, I mean metaphorically, you have to resist that reality. So just like how in this life, of course, this is, I'm just saying this is just, I've had certain moments where I'm not proud of these moments, but I shouted, for example, in that moment. Okay. And when I shouted in that moment, because the action was expressive, I could not see anyone else's world other than my own. This is why they say a person who's angry can't be reasonable. Because the emotion is not even from the moment. You can't convince an angry man. You can't talk sense to an angry man because their behavior is literally a suggestion of a different moment in their life. You know, the child wanted to do something when it was younger, it couldn't, suddenly it grows up and it can do it, and then when it attempts to do it for the first time, there's an unbelievable intensity, you know. I find pretty much knowledge is learning different languages. All that way, the way the educational system is structured, it's just kind of show and tell. Primarily, there are these basic languages that you as a human being must learn. And when you learn these languages, you have methods of interpreting the phenomena you see in this life. Eventually you will notice a sort of, I find that playfulness is the best route towards this. That means you can't chase truth. You'll freak out truth, and truth will be like, go away. It's kind of like Sri Ramana Maharshi, this enlightened guy, would say that you have to sit still and silent, and the truth, the wisdom that you seek comes to you. This is why patience for the old soul is very valuable. That is why, like, it's like the eyes of eternity open, because patience is an eternal quality. A temporary being has no patience. If you think you're going to lose, you're going to get out of whatever situation you're in. If you feel you're going to lose, most people are like this because they react to data. Like literally, it's like somebody coming in, like screaming beside them, and the person, like, you know, jumping up. You know, so that sort of reaction, it's also occurring subconsciously and also in accordance to ideology. Now, is it helpful to zoom in into the source of language? It's not a common thing, but you can say it's like the backup program to a civilization that through ignorance is forgetting its nature. Really, life is, its value is in attention. And attention is a sort of changeless awareness of phenomena. So if I ask you, what is the most valuable thing in this life? Some people may name some really expensive objects. Maybe they might say certain technologies. This is the most valuable thing. Some people may say money, you know. But I find the most valuable thing in this world of ours is the value giver. And that is not an external question, because it's literally you looking in the mirror and you're like, okay, life, I looked in the mirror and saw my body, I saw my face, but what is that looking through my eyes? How do I see the mind? And the mind is really astonishing because it's not a tangible thing, it's not an object. That means it's as if, like, it doesn't matter if you call it soul, mind, it's just an unknown X. It's literally a black hole. The soul is a black hole in the subjective realm. And as black holes have incredible gravitational pulls, similarly, this unknown concept of this animate collective individual phenomenon, like this thing that's oscillating, it's as if, like, let me tell you, it's as if on one level, sure, there's life and death, you know, and there could be an afterlife where there couldn't be. But on another level, it's kind of like, it's like body being in mind, mind being in body being in mind being in body. You're oscillating between this. So on some level, it's like, I remember hearing Noam Chomsky and kind of like opposing certain things he was saying. Not opposing, I mean, like his view on language and consciousness was that he feels it's certain, your decision making occurs before consciousness through a certain biological movement. No, I find Noam Chomsky is just buttercoat, like, butter coating it, like, sugar coating it, butter coating, sugar coating it, you know? In reality, what it is that because we're temporary creatures, whatever system of knowledge, whatever structure of language or kind of like ship of language we're on, eventually this ship, as the body becomes dissolves, your body is making a long journey into dissolution, right? Your personality is afraid of death, but existentially, how can atoms that are being consciousness somehow have an opinion on death? They're just atoms. You know, on some level, I'm Stardust talking to you. Am I not? So it's one of those situations where, you know, I find it's we step out of language worship by realizing we're not creatures of thought, creatures of ideology. We are creatures of attention, and the attention can navigate between the ideologies. So the moment you can have more than one thought, you're neither of those thoughts. So I'm telling you, people can feed any story in your mind, but Mr. Within is telling you, you gotta find the mirror of existence. You have to find a moment where you don't need to see a lie anymore. You don't need to see inefficient ideas of the self anymore. It's as if you got to confront it. When you don't confront it, all those people who say they have stress and depression, it's literally because their subjective landscape, literally how they see the world, is allowing that concept to arise. Sometimes it doesn't have to do with anything. Like, you know, I've had moments where I remember it happened, and I was in UK, and I get this sickness, this sort of fever, and and of course it happened is because one night I got extremely, like, this is 2010. In 2010, when I was living in the UK for some time, and what happened is I remember it was and I was with this French girl at the time named Bettina, and she couldn't, I was alone, like, it was a night where I wanted to be with people and somehow I couldn't, things couldn't work out, right? And so I remember I get incredibly kind of wasted, I drink a lot, and I remember I go, and this is of course not something incredibly personal, but I'll share it. I remember I go and I kind of like fall into this, like the place I was renting, there was a kind of old school English tub. And so I was pretty drunk, and I just remember I just go lie down there and just kind of, it was just comfortable for a second, and I was in this incredibly sad and hopeless and anguish That's the best thing I could say. I think it's like when I feel I experience the kind of lesser states of mind, I go towards anguish. I mean, every person goes somewhere where they're drawn, in accordance to how their eyes have opened. But in that moment, it was a moment of complete failure. It was as if, like, not only there was an internal view of failure, there was also an external manifestation of the failure. It's as if you're thinking you failed to such a degree where even if you haven't failed, you will fail, because that's where the attention is. You know, something that many comedians, I noticed this, many comedians on this planet are doing. They're doing an incredible contribution. And some people look at comedians, stand-up comics, and I honor them as if like they are the noble warriors of humanity, But of course, I'm being funny. But I'll tell you this, like, on a serious note, the reason is because they change the attention. They re-evoke humanity. We need to see human beings. We need to see human beings in their purest state of freedom. We on this planet have never had this level of technology and advancement, and we've never attempted or wondered, kind of like, okay, what would the greatest version of the civilization look like? What would literally have to happen? And you'll see it can't be one man's idea, so it means literally environment building. That means we're going to eventually realize if the citizen acts properly, it wouldn't need a government. Do you see? It wouldn't need a controlling authority. This doesn't mean the government should fade. It just means that the relationship, literally everything is energy, and energy that is through, like, literally like piloting its attention to various quarters of manifestation. And can become the pilot of the soul. In that sentence, there's a suggestion that you are a creature that's knowing things, and there can come a moment where you know things in a way where your free will becomes indistinguishable from the divine will. So literally, it's a moment where God and man, kind of like how Meister Eckhart, this Christian mystic from 1,000 years ago, said, the same eyes I see God are the same eyes God sees me. A sort of union. This union is not like a kumbaya oneness moment on the beach, This union has to do with attention and how attention is keeping itself. So it's like life is not, most people don't realize, but everyone in their subconscious wants the easy way out. It doesn't matter how strong, how passionate you appear. Every person wants the best strategy. And if the best strategy shows itself, they will attempt it. Now, the issue is that the civilization is designed, or at least when I see modern civilization, it's not that modern to me. It's just a little bit modern. That means if we took the technology away, we've just built, giant rectangles. We have not even cared as human beings for the experience, because back in the day, I remember seeing in this documentary that evidently during the time of the Renaissance, the Medici family was in power. And I believe it was the Medici. And the Medici family, they started making the cities beautiful. It's as if, imagine you walking on the street and it's like magnificent architecture. As if people actually gave a shit about the street. People, trust me, even in third world countries, it's worse. I'm telling you, personally, in countries where the citizen is being more cruelly treated, or when I say cruelly treated, literally the consequence of nature. Literally, that person's life is rough to a degree where they don't care about animals, or in some sense, you don't care about the earth. It's just space. It's like parking space for your physical existence. But you don't realize that this parking space is the only space where it's like the only parking space. And after your lifetime, the future generations come into the same parking space. So I'm realizing the only thing that's eternal is anything that helps design the parking space. So either the citizens change or the governing pattern changes. And of course, we cannot avoid their codependence. By the way, guys, due to the nature of these kind of talks being live streams, feel free to share your comments and ideas if you're listening to this. When the value is found in the unknown, knowledge is at peace automatically. That means sometimes there is known karma and unknown karma. When you become aware of unknown karma, it's like, no, both of them are here. You can't just have an ordered solution, and you can't have just a chaotic solution. Life requires both, and the reason it requires both because both sides keep the other side alive. So without chaos, order has no purpose. Without order, chaos has no purpose. If there are no good people, how can whatever evil people do? It's like how can you say there's evil? There never was a reference point to kind of relate to good. Because the nature of life requires it's as if like if you were meant to just follow your own truth, then you wouldn't actually need the external world. But because the external world is here, man can't ignore it. And this was something that I kind of like saw, like I remember I was reading in certain ancient texts that like certain like ancient contexts, like that it was as if people were called towards enlightenment. And I was like, great, somebody said, okay, let's attempt for the better, And so then I realized people suddenly said, you got to get rid of your ego, you shouldn't have thoughts. And I'm like, oh my God, they don't know why they should get better. And I realized the fallacy that we try to make true. And if you fear your mind, you can't let it go and it won't let go of you. That means this is an incredibly strange way right now I'm speaking, but it's kind of like you have to look your mind straight into the face. You got to stare into that abyss that Friedrich Nietzsche said, if you stare long enough into the abyss will stare into you. That abyss you got to confront in your mind. You got to literally look at your body, look at the moment and be like, okay, universe, you've brought something here. Purpose. You were meant to be a design of nature and you're being it. Just live naturally till the transition point, and it's like, that's it. That's the body's purpose. The body's purpose is to be its design. It's like, what's the purpose of a cup? It's like, ask a thirsty man and they'll tell you. There's a story which has to do with a sort of intuitive morality. This story is about this kid who hears there's this enlightened Zen master. And he goes to see this enlightened Zen master, and he sees the Zen master just sitting on his porch quietly. And the kid goes there, and the kid is not acquainted that much with Zen culture and Zen tradition. So he's not even considering the domains of respect that he should have. So he just goes there and he starts talking and he sits there. It's like, hey man, I've heard you're enlightened. You got to tell me the truth. Tell me, what is this? What is the truth? What is this? What's the point of this enlightenment? You know? And the guy is just silent, silent. The guy is as if as it's like a tree. The guy is as still and silent as a tree. You know? The guy's just there staring, silent, no answer. This kid every day comes, you know, to a point where he every day tries to like ask something, ask. Eventually, it reaches a day where this guy's silence is driving the kid crazy. And the guy's like, okay, I can't take this anymore, man. It's like if you really knew the truth, you'd say it by now. And he leaves. He leaves and he kind of demonstrates this rudeness. What that means is his ego was suffocating and the ego suddenly found a way out and expressed itself, externalized itself, you know? As the kid's kind of leaving the place, it's like sunset, and he just gets this feeling like, holy shit, I should go back. He suddenly sees his own folly. You can't be a wise man unless you can see you have learned to be a fool. This is why only the wise man sees the fool. And myth has it, even the wise man is a fool. But is it better to be a fool of a world of truth or the expert of a world of lies? Where does the presence of intelligence stand? The only question that has ever been asked. How is the moment being here? Once we send armies of future generation kids wondering about the unconscious, wondering about the unknown, wondering about, and they will suddenly realize the enemy you have never, it doesn't make sense. Let me tell you something. It's kind of like the movie Independence Day when you see like that extraterrestrial invasion causing all the wars occurring between nations to stop, and human beings were like, holy shit, like a different species is attacking us, let's unite and kick this thing out of our turf and then get back to our fight, you know? So in that moment, what happens is, due to the nature of a much more macro emergency, the micro unites. The kid goes back and suddenly he reaches a point where the kid is silent. For the first time, the kid doesn't want to speak. And in that moment, when the Zen master sees this kid is authentically silent, it's like he's not trying to be something in the moment. He's just himself in the moment, silent. He looks at him and he says, why the ceaseless coming and going? And the kid suddenly gets it. You know, the story has it, he attains nirvana. He realizes why this ceaseless coming and going. In some sense, why have this endless, infinite, multidimensional journey behind your eyes? In some sense, when the whole moment is present. We are reaching an era where we have to become advanced communicators because language has to evolve. It's like, even if you don't want to learn language, like language will pull you in. Language is is the Iron Man suit of the civilization's mind. Or we can say language is the skull of the mind. Because what are the options, guys? It's like you gotta start universally. That means the reason I use writing as such a intimate and divine thing for me is because I have saved my humanity through certain moments of writing things and reading them later on and remembering who I was, you know. The chance to live. Freedom comes at a cost if there is ignorance of the evolutionary position. If we want to be in the future too soon, we will become machines. If we want to stay in the past, nature will break us through the fading of memory. You see, the greatest wisdom that can be said, I think, is that this universe is alive. And because it is alive, your relationship with it is one where you can't have a belief system when you meet it when you are experiencing it. You know, when you experience something, you know? It's like somebody said life is meaningless, and the guy's like, you're, you know, selling yourself too short. And that's the case. The value is self-generated. And for some people, this could be chaotic. It could be too much responsibility. They'll be like, oh my God, I'm not just responsible for my future, but I'm responsible for my past, my present, in every way my mind has manifested since my birth till now as a process. You see, the questions get deep and they become beautiful because they evoke worlds. A question is kind of like, it's like, it kind of like, imagine an astronaut that uses these oxidizers like on its kind of like the back of its suit in space to kind of go closer to, you know, the ship and come further away from the ship. So I want you to imagine that on some level we are trying to make we're trying to bring the sky down to earth. We're trying to, as the micro, contemplate the macro, and the only way the micro can contemplate the macro is just to, based on its micro capacity, cut the macro into multiple pieces. That means sometimes if you don't evolve, life has to remain as a kind of separate. It's like the wheel of karma has to exist. Your mind hasn't found any other way to see the scenario, subconsciously. The world we live in and the world that lives in us. So language requires to evolve. Now, Mike, I'm simply giving a certain commentary on its direction, and I feel that all of knowledge has to be not thrown away. It's as if we keep the past as an archive and we simulate a new view, a new narrative of a global entity. It's the glory of the temporal mind. That means when a temporary being is given freedom, it will feel eternal in that moment. And so I've asked myself many times, who is looking through my eyes? It was one of those questions that when it came to me, it changed my world. Who is looking through my eyes? I realized I did not know. And that's when I got I noticed the unknown, like on an experiential level, you know? It's kind of like consciousness is the newest development, and so you living a conscious life seems to be the greatest idea. And to live a conscious life, you have to ask yourself, how do you get the greatest consciousness is by wondering where the unconsciousness begins. So the only way the kind of entrepreneur kind of looks at his business and he's like, okay, what's wrong here? When he asks himself that question, he starts seeing every part of it and starts wondering, locating the causes of an inefficiency. How far will stories take us? We have to find new technology. That means I'm sure every inventor in history, the moment they invented that thing, that invention, they were like, whoa, anybody could have done this. That means greatness's greatest realization is that its greatness comes from the world. And when you realize your greatness comes from the world, you simply realize you're a moment of being. So all phenomena in your memory in your moment is a suggestion of how your mind is held. This is why we have sympathy and empathy as human beings, is because the behavior of that human being in front of us resembles designs that we internally can refer to. So what that means is pattern recognition. So it's like human beings are data processing kind of animals. And these data processing animals, eventually when they meet each other, the way they're processing data will have similarity patterns. These patterns that are very similar to one another eventually become common realities, and from those points, in some sense, there emerges a plane of existence. So you have to realize, you have to kind of like how certain Buddhic people, Guru Padmasambhava of the Pure Land Buddhist tradition, you can say that he was trying to create heaven on earth. A bunker of paradise in a place before paradise. To be honest, the secret of the greatest solutions of mankind are found in moments where the problem and the answer are dancing. It's literally like you look at a foggy night and you kind of look in the sky and you see this glowing white dragon and this black dragon are kind of spiraling around one another, flying through the sky like both roaring or something. Life, you can say, as Chuang Tzu did, your thoughts in life, they are like leaves on a tree. And as the seasons pass and as you even change, the nature of the thought changes. That means no person on this planet has ever been able to hold on to a belief more than that instant it was generated. And then when the attention moved past it, it became an echo or kind of remnant pattern and residue in the memory. Now, before I realize that means the mind has permission to personalize itself. So what it is you might not believe it, guys, but certain ideas, thoughts, concepts, I have like relationships with, as if like, I don't know how to tell you, as if like when I see the concept of Renaissance, it's as if like the ego at that moment bows. It's like these behavioral kind of responses. It's like, how would I say it? Most human, here, just, I gotta say this before I can make the point. Child opens its eyes, starts crying, the newborn baby that's born in this world. Its mind, even if you talk to the baby or something, it's not going to acknowledge you. Because the child's mind has just entered a kind of building process, and it's first building the world. That means our brains are so sophisticated, our intelligence as creatures is so sophisticated, that our mind becomes the world. Literally, like a chameleon, it's trying to copy itself as the world first. So the child's mind is being the world first, you know? And because the child requires to be nourished and held in warmth and compassion, it becomes it becomes a situation where as the child's mind is building the world, it builds it in the warmth of the biological bond. So what I'm telling you is that our psychologies develop through certain phases. And how you experience thoughts now has to do with your principal universal philosophy, as I call it. Literally, the first duality that sets the world into an infinite potential. This is why I'm saying we're in two worlds at once, because you can right now exactly imagine the opposite of everything you're doing now. Imagine if you were to repeat this day, but doing exactly the opposite of everything you did. You would see, so in any moment, in accordance to ordered design and chaotic design, there is both. You know? It's as if somebody, once wondered, it's like, who was I before I was born? And you realize language had nowhere to go. Language had no mind to become. I find what should happen with the educational system is that it's like, isn't it kind of simple, guys? Children, they leave school, many of them. It's like there's giant statistics on it. As many kids they leave school, the reason they leave is either for like a sort of pleasure, personal pleasure, or they want to go make money, right? They feel their time can have a different value somewhere else. Okay, so here's the thing. In a world where we're enslaving everyone to money, that comes at a disadvantage. That means where money is given, people will go. Isn't that strange? So what if the educational system paid every student for their assignment? And if their assignment paper was exceptional, they got a bonus extra dollars on it, That child would never miss a class. Because that child eventually sees when it grows up, like, how can I tell you? This is why children, it's always occurred. Children are trying to act older. There's a leap going on. Generations, there's a leap, there's a gap in between. That means that there's certain personalities for certain generations that are never born because literally the mindset leaps. The child tries to be too much the future. Of course, these are just my observances. But hopefully I'm getting the idea across. I find creativity is a call to action. It's a calling. Literally, the environment asks you. You ignore the world, you ignore your mind, you ignore the faculties of your intelligence because of a belief. You have given your power to a thought. I'm telling you, ideas take energy. And that's a very primitive way of me saying it, but it's the case. That means as I'm speaking to you, I can just, it's like the energy levels of the being adjust all the time. The more observant you are, the more you tend to notice it. So, if there is the potential that our intelligence extends into unknown dimensions of that move beyond what I call the language threshold, it would bring the question, what would the body do? What would whatever there is beyond the body do? And whatever is beyond the body is more the free will and the divine will becoming or having a singular cause. So you see, it's as if like the character in the video game realizes he's also part of the environment. You know, you're not just in an environment, you are the environment. Your mind can be said to be how your attention has journeyed through many environments with various modes of wanting to respond, and all this psychological buildup. It's the dance of attention into the ever present now. There was a poet named Rumi. He said, be living poetry. And that sentence was kind of like very intense for me. It wasn't very intense like I understood it, but it was intense in the sense that it's not even your expression that matters. It doesn't matter how energy is appearing. What matters is the levels of harmony and efficiency they can advance. So when we wonder about the value of the human being, because there's free will, we're like, what if this free will is the next genius of the world? What if like some child in a poverty stricken country has the next solution to what we need as a civilization? So I've realized right now we are all on a planet, and it's, believe it or not, kind of like a castaway situation, as if like this kind of we are all like thrown in different parts, and we have to kind of climb back in this island and figure out what to do. It's a kind of cosmic episode of Survivor, you know? There is no answer when the question is changing all the time. There is no question when the answer had nothing to do with the question. Life works in accordance to values. The child's mind becomes the world, and from the subjective world that the mind has become, it extracts selfhood. It extracts self, communicating in a way where you don't share too much. You, in some sense, ask questions. As if, why do you think this is like this? And then ask the kid again, why do you think? It's like, you know how children come and say, why? I find sometimes it's interesting to ask, like, maybe like twice, like, why did you say that? Why, like, what happened? So eventually the child gets acquainted with the ability to realize it can communicate. It's kind of like this situation where we're like, oof. After we've solved world hunger, all those children now, their minds need to recalibrate to modern civilization. It's as if there is a ridiculous amount of lives that we need to save on this planet. But the issue is that we don't, even if we save them, where are we where is humanity's efforts directing the structure of the civilization? So I'm kind of realizing, like, oh my god, there's this 4 billion-year-old thing that's here called humanity, you know, this 4 billion-year-old science project, and it requires to be attended to. And if all the children in the world are so keen on trying to escape into electronic simulated realities, they will avoid the natural world, which was the first world given. So it's as if before you play any sort of video game, first realize you are already in a video game. And then you can probably go read the book by Michael Talbot called The Holographic Simulation, which I haven't read, but I kind of, you can say my eyes know what the contents list is. Character development is looking at yourself in the mirror. Aldous Huxley has this quote where he says there are things known and things unknown, and in between are the doors of perception. And human consciousness opens its eyes between the known and the unknown, and the known we associate to free will, the unknown we associate to divine will if need be. That means, like, we can't do anything about it. There's a lot of religious people on this planet, and a lot of these religious people, they acknowledge a divine will. Now here's the unique thing: both the religious and the non-religious are looking at the same world, are they not? The same physical world. So if they're looking at the same physical world, it's a matter of which language they use to speak in. So on some level, you can never justify any idea, because all ideas have freedom. Do you know what I mean? That means the bad idea is allowed to exist as much as the good idea. There's freedom for the idea. We require to be responsible for the potentials of the human mind, which means the task of power is to realize it's achieved its victory. Now the world is dying in front of it. What's it going to do? And that's the test of power. It's as if you realize, is the personal experience more valuable than the impersonal? And if you say yes, it's as if you never needed to physically exist. It's as if a lot of violence and a lot of cruelty that's occurring, it's a lot of it never needed to exist. It was unnecessary. But the intelligence chose that because, of course, what can you expect from an evolving animal that drinks on Fridays, you know? Pretty much I find civilization has to start building backup systems. It doesn't have to have the immediate solution to truth. It just has to have attempts at wondering about what will happen. And anything you wonder what will happen or what's happening to it or how it's happening, you have instantly found the scholar's kind of rhythm. The curiosity, you're authentic. It's like finding your true self. That's the beginning. That's like the first milestone. Then after you have learned to live in an honest world, what happens is your mind begins honestly occurring. When your mind begins honestly occurring, it means that you stop associating. That means it's like when an idea passes by your sight, you don't suddenly say, oh my God, that idea is my truth. Like you don't worship thought. You don't worship language. After idol worship, people stopped worshiping objective phenomena. They started worshiping subjective phenomena. Like I've definitely, I think, made that clear. You know? So it's just potential energy, and some dude in a podcast is saying it should be kinetic. That's it. That's the liftoff into the unknown sky. You realize every day happens once, and you deserve to be alive, because why else would you design be here? You know, some things are self-explanatory because they're instantaneously present. It's like you can't define creativity, you know, because it's the new. How can you define the new? I mean, something can have a newer version, but even that newer version can have a newer version. And when some things stop evolving objectively, they start evolving subjectively. That means man, it's a sign of his evolutionary kind of leap that he has a mind that can so take up his attention that he kind of forgets the external world he's in. But the pilot of consciousness needs to navigate as the whole plane of existence, and that implies that we're not trying to look for some treasure in the darkness of the mind, you know, in the unconscious. We're not like that. We're not going as if we're hungry people, you know. We're not hungry for truth. We're just realizing, okay, we're this known phenomena. What is the edges? What are the limits of intelligence? The limits of intelligence come to the sophistication of the handling of the objective. So once you're content enough with objective life, then the subjective becomes interesting to you. Then you, in some sense, are ready to ask questions that will, it's like you train your mind by walking. Like literally, you got to journey through conception. And the best way you have inspiration for this journey is really having authentic questions that you realize that question is originating from your eyes. Therefore, you're the only one who can find a solution to it. Some things that you see are simply some things that only you see. And everybody's like that because imagination is, I mean, I've said in other talks, it's like this private room. It's like this private VIP room you have when, like, any object you see right now in front of you, visualize it hovering in the air. It's like suddenly in that VIP room of your subjectivity, it's there, you know. Anyways, guys, I hope this talk was helpful. And kind of how Rumi said, just like how a bird has two wings and requires to symmetrically kind of move the both wings together, the mind's wings are chaos and order. That means the mind requires a kind of domain of chaos and domain of order to exist. The yin yang symbol requires like a sphere, a circle. It requires the outline, and it becomes one of those situations where You breathe as an honest moment that you realize existence is an allowance of will. So don't have an opinion on consciousness. Language is used to communicate, like to share imagery, your beliefs. You know how many beliefs I've had to say goodbye to, literally as if I've watched an old comrade pass away. Like it's as if so many ways that my mind felt was holding the world, those structures shattered. It's like sometimes your experiences shatter, and sometimes you articulate them and they shatter. You know. And so this shattering of the consciousness, this ability for the egoic construct of the moment to be observant of itself, therefore for the being, not, it's like not worrying about the fragmentation in the psyche, to have to constantly keep it in one way of normality, but to in some sense realize that we have to become responsible for the multidimensional effects of our singular perspectives. So we have to become responsible for the ability of our minds to respond to the world. You know, it's like how else can I say? Anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in. And I'll be honest, if my voice is getting across, I really appreciate anybody who hears this stuff. Thanks, guys. In one moment, the whole cosmos turns.